We have this amazing guy with us today, Vedran. Is that correctly good? Cool. Who's going to tell us more about the technology behind blockchain. I've been telling so many friends about this event, and they've all been asking me, so what is blockchain really? But I haven't been able to answer them because I don't. So this event is going to be really, really good for me as well. But let's welcome Vedran with a huge applaud, and then we'll see where this goes.
Awesome. Well, it's firstly really, really good to see so many people turning up for this. Firstly, thank you, Elias and Anton, for inviting me to speak to you guys today about blockchain technology. Some of you might already be aware, what's being said about blockchain. Some call it Internet 2.0. Others say it's the next technological Big Bang. Whatever it may be, the technology does in fact promise a whole bunch of changes. But there are a whole bunch of considerations that we need to be aware of before we start implementing. So this is what I'm going to cover today. I will first look at the problem and give you a solution that blockchain promises. We will then look at how it works in detail before discussing some applications and then also some limitations of the technology. We'll look at some current uses, the future, and of course some relevance to you, hopefully as entrepreneurs. There's a lot of information in this, so I'm going to be moving through relatively quickly, but at certain points I'll slow down. If at any stage you have a question in between your bites, ask. I have no problem with that. Okay, you don't have to wait till the end or anything like that. Alright, so this is today's problem. One of the biggest problems on the internet today is that we simply don't know who's on the other end. We've all heard of horror stories of money gone missing, or ordering things on eBay, things not arriving, and so on and so forth. Yeah? So today's problem requires a solution, and that solution is all about trust. How do we establish trust with the person that's on the other side? We simply don't have the time or the resources to invest into figuring out exactly who that person is on the other side. Right? So today we use these third-party intermediaries that do that on our behalf. We trust them to investigate the person that we're dealing with, confirm their identity, and do the transaction for us. Commonly referred to as the FI institutions, or financial, insurance, and real estate. We pay these guys a lot of money to do this on our behalf. So if you're going to transfer money overseas, you'll most likely have gone to a bank. The bank's done that for you. But it's also a question of accounting. What is accounting? It says there, it keeps track of transactions that have occurred, but also, more importantly, of ownership. And ownership is derived by consensus. So what do I mean by that? If I told you I own this building, you would probably laugh, and you'd be justified to do so. But if I produced a proof of purchase that is stamped by one of these fire institutions, you would probably go, alright, not bad. Right? And that is ownership, proof of ownership. Same thing as if I go to a shop and I walk out with my little receipt and the police stops me. Mr. Maslik, you stole that. Here's my receipt. I own it. And that's what we say is determined by consensus. Society, by and large, has given authority to these institutions, the financial, insurance, and real estate institutions. We trust them. We have empowered them by consensus to do this for us. Consensus becomes important as we move on. Of course, this system is rather cumbersome. So if anybody's purchased a home or a car or anything really, there's all these stops, particular points that you need to go through. So buying a house, 6 or 7 stops that you need to go through in order to have that purchase. You need to prove that you have the money, the person needs to prove that they own the house, and so on and so forth. For this very reason, it's unreliable. Because there's all these different points, it means that there are all these different points of failure. Somebody forgot to sign something. Somebody forgot to add a piece of paper. It's just sitting in somebody's bottom of the in tray. Again, most of us have had this experience in one way or another. Sweden's pretty good at this, but the rest of the world does struggle a lot more than you guys. It's also very expensive because there's all these intermediaries between us and the person we're dealing with. We have to pay all of their fees. For that reason, it's also slow, and probably most importantly, it's not transparent. So we don't know what happens to our money that sits in the bank. We don't know that if all of us went to the bank right now and tried to withdraw our money, the bank wouldn't have that money. They legally only need to keep 10%, and they can play with the other 90%. They can invest it and make profit from our money. Yes, okay, they insure our money. That's an advantage, but we also pay for that. This has contributed to this slow erosion of trust between us as consumers and these fire institutions. And no event has contributed to this more than the 2008 global financial crisis. As most of you are aware, the crisis occurred by and large due to unethical lending and generally unethical procedures, unethical behaviour, and greed that pretty much brought the global financial system to its knees. It's in fact out of the ashes of the 2008 financial crisis that blockchain found its feet, through Satoshi Nakamoto, with Bitcoin being the first one. Who here has heard of Bitcoin? All right, I'm guessing most of you are here because you saw what's happening to Bitcoin at the moment. Bitcoin uses blockchain technology. Bitcoin is a currency that runs on blockchain technology that started out of the ashes of the 2008 financial crisis. All right, let's look at a very quick example. Say I was wanting to send money from Gothenburg, $1,000 from Gothenburg to my mum in Sydney. Highly unlikely, it's probably going to be the other way around, she'll be sending money to me, but just for a moment, let's imagine. If I do it by traditional means, there are at least four entities involved. Me going to my bank, giving money to my bank then speaks to my mum's bank, probably using SWIFT along the way. Then my mum's bank calls my mum and says, hey, your son has mysteriously sent you $1,000. This never happened before. Then my mum goes and gets the money. This process takes 3 to 5 business days, which is a significant amount of time. When you think that we're landing probes on Mars, it takes 3 to 5 working days to send money from one country to another. It's quite a long time. And for the pleasure of doing business with these banks, we'll pay $50 to $80 in fees. Not only in fees, but in unfavourable transaction conversion rates. Okay, so the banks will charge us a conversion rate that's favourable to them, but not to us. So, all in all, my mum will, best case, end up with $950 in her account. Now, if I was to use, let's use Bitcoin, since everybody knows it. If I was to use Bitcoin to transfer that money, it would take about 8 seconds for that money to transfer. It would happen just between me and my mum, no third party involved, and next to no fees. I mean, the fees are negligible. They would cover the cost of running that network. So mum would end up with just about $1,000, just shy of $1,000. That is the magic of blockchain right now as the world has seen it. Right? So firstly, it's completely decentralized, which means that these fire institutions don't exist anymore in the middle. We're dealing directly with each other, which means we have taken out all these possible points of failure along the way, which means it's fast and efficient. It moves directly. It's safe from forging and hacking due to the security protocols of the network, which we'll cover in detail shortly. It's reliable, again, because there's no multiple points of failure, and most importantly, no human interaction. So no human who's got a weekend. No human that's, oh, I've got to knock off, I'm going to the bar, it's Friday, it's 3 news. I'm out. Alright, so none of that exists. It's immutable, which means it cannot be changed. Once a transaction is created, it cannot be changed. Once it goes on the network, it is there. And it's transparent, at least in the public networks like Bitcoin. You can see all transactions. You can also see activities of all accounts. But what you can't do, well, I'll talk about this later, but generally what you can't do is you can't associate a single account to an individual. Okay, so that's why they say Bitcoin is anonymous. There are a bunch of question marks that go with that. But you'll see why it's anonymous, because the keys that the addresses are quite complex. So it's little wonder then that Christine Lagarde expects us to see some serious disruptions. For those that don't know, Christine Lagarde is the managing director of the International Monetary Fund. Again, for those that don't know what the IMF is, the IMF effectively balances trade globally. It provides aid to economies, and some might argue helps exploit some of those weaker countries. But that's probably a different presentation for a different topic. And needless to say, if somebody like her says this about Bitcoin and blockchain in general, then that's a good indicator that this is a worthwhile technology. All right, so before we get into nuts and bolts, some key terminology. Firstly, what's a block? I want you to simply imagine an Excel spreadsheet where each row is an individual transaction. You put that Excel spreadsheet, that's a number of transactions in it, that is a block. Once a block has been completed, and we'll talk about that shortly what that means, once it's been completed, it joins the end of the blockchain. So a blockchain, as the name suggests, is a number of blocks that are linked to each other. Once a block gets into a blockchain, it is permanent, immutable. We'll cover that shortly. And we have what are called nodes all around the world, which are computers dedicated to doing work on a particular blockchain network. That's what's known as mining. So contributing computing power to do work, creating blocks on a network. So how does it actually work? Okay, so let's use that example again, where I'm magically sending money to my mum, unheard of, but let's assume I'm sending $1,000, I create a transaction on my side, and I broadcast that transaction into this, let's say, Bitcoin network. Bitcoin nodes, or nodes on the Bitcoin network, computers dedicated to doing work on the network, will now compete with each other to collect as many transactions as they can, put them into an Excel spreadsheet, into a block, solve a mathematical puzzle, which I'll cover shortly. And once they have solved the puzzle, created a block, as in lined up all the transactions, they propose that to the rest of the network, to the rest of the nodes on the network. This is where consensus becomes important, because the rest of the nodes need to have a look at that block that I've created, validate the transactions, give it a thumbs up, and also make sure that I have in fact solved the puzzle. Give the puzzle a thumbs up. More than 51% of the network needs to do that, which is the consensus. Once that occurs, that block gets the ticks, gets the thumbs up, gets attached to the rest of the blockchain, and my mum ultimately gets her money. Does that make sense? Are there any questions so far? If there are, please ask me. Good. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said that, I mean, if you're doing one transaction, what is the Excel spreadsheet? Is it many other?
Yes, good question. Very good. So if I'm doing one,
Yeah.
so the miners or the nodes will try to collect as many. So say all of us are doing transactions all around the world. So they try to get as many transactions, different ones, into a single block. Yeah, good question. Okay. So there are two things that all blockchain networks will try to do. Firstly is to ensure that a block is immutable. In other words, that it cannot be changed. Once a block is attached to the blockchain, it needs to make sure that a block cannot be changed. And secondly, it needs to be able to confirm that a transaction that has been broadcast to the network was sent by somebody holding a private key. All right? Somebody who's actually authorized to use that account. If you're confused now, give me 2 minutes. And they do this through two security features: cryptographic hash functions, and the other one is digital signatures. This is the nuts and bolts of blockchain technology. So what is cryptographic hash function? As it says there, it creates a string of characters of fixed size from a data set of arbitrary size. So that means that I can write out a textbook or I can write a single "how you doing" message. Vastly different data sets. Regardless of how big they are, once I put both through a cryptographic hash generator, I will get a fixed hash coming out at the end. Okay, so a fixed size hash. It'll be a little more clear in a minute. It's also deterministic. That the same input will always produce the same output, at least for the modern hash generators. Okay, so every time I write pi into my hash generator, I will always get the same hash come out of the other side. Small changes, minute changes, even a single space or a full stop in my input will cause dramatic changes to the output of the hash. And most importantly, it is known as a one-way function, so it works like a one-way valve. Okay, so once I've created a hash out of this input, it is basically impossible to go back the other way using the hash. You're probably going, no, I don't believe you. Fair enough? Let's have a look. Okay, so let's say, all right, entrepreneurial society, let's assume this is a secret society, and you guys have a secret code. I don't know, you mentioned innovation a lot. Innovation is God. Oh. What the? Let's try this one. Alright, you see that? Okay, so this is a standard hash generator. So I'm going to write innovation is God. And down here is my hash. So if you imagine up here, if I type an entire textbook, I will still get a hash that's this size. Alright? Now if I change even the slightest change, I'm going to put a full stop. Just pay attention to the hash. It's a completely different hash. Okay? So without the full stop, with the full stop. Alright? So why does this matter? So let's talk about this secret society, right? Two people in this secret society, Joe and Mary, they don't know each other. Joe says to Mary, I'm a member of this secret society, entrepreneurship. Mary goes, oh yeah, me too. And Joe goes, what's the secret password? Mary goes, I've heard this before. How do I know you're in the society? And Joe goes, how do I know you're in the society? Why don't you tell me so I know? So you see the dilemma. Neither of them can actually say the password because then they'll give it away. And what if the other person is just playing a trick on them? So what Mary and Joe can do is pull out their hash generators, type in their innovation is God's secret key into the hash generator, compare the hashes, because if you remember that the same input will always produce the same hash. They compare the hashes and give each other high fives and go, yep, sick, let's go to one. Yeah? So that's how it works. But how does this work in blockchain? This is how it works. So let's look at a block a little closer. Okay? This is simply a simplified version, but the key components of a block, there are 4 of them. The first one is the hash of a previous block that goes into the header of the block that I'm trying to create. So of the previous block, the complete hash goes up there, which links it. Okay, it's effectively the signature of the previous block in my block, therefore linking it to the one beforehand, creating a chain. The next I have is my list of transactions. So my Excel spreadsheet from all over the world that I've just collected as a miner, and I'm trying to create a block. I then have my address, the miner's address, where I will receive transaction costs for all these transactions, and also what's called the mining reward. Okay, so for example, in the Bitcoin blockchain, once you form a block and it's accepted by the community, you get 12.5 Bitcoins right now. When you think that Bitcoin is just about to hit $10,000 a coin, serious business. All right. Then we have the random number, or the nonce. This becomes very important. It is absolutely just the random number that's thrown in there, because that number is the only number that a node, a miner, can modify. They can't go and change any transactions. They can't change the hash of the previous block, and they're certainly not going to change their address. This becomes important. Why? Because a miner will take all of this information using one of those hash generators. This, of course, happens automatically. Right? Using one of those hash generators, they will write out all of this data into it, and out comes a hash. Okay, so there's all the data into a hash generator, they get a hash. Easy, right? But the resulting hash needs to be of a low enough value. So what does that mean? So if you look, I have only 3 zeros here. This value needs to be low enough, it needs to have enough zeros at the front that the network will accept it. And the network sets this difficulty automatically. So this is, I guess, the magic that happens. And miners or nodes need to commit computing power to solve that puzzle. In other words, what they do is they change the random number millions of times per second. Because even the slightest change in this will give us a dramatic change in this, yeah? So they do that millions of times over per second. Until such time that this number, the network says, bing, well done, you have solved the puzzle. So once a low enough number is set, reached, a miner can then solve that puzzle. That difficulty is adjusted by the system itself in such a way that a block, for example, on the Bitcoin blockchain, a new block can be generated only after 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay, so it doesn't matter how many nodes, how many computers in the world you dedicate to the network to try and solve it quicker. The algorithms are set in such a way that to solve the puzzle will become more difficult. And the difficulty is set in such a way that it takes 10 minutes on average for a new block to be solved. The reason for that is to make the network more efficient. Because if the network allowed me to create a block every second, right, it means that what's going to happen is a block is going to have a single transaction in it. Right? Whereas this way, if it's 10 minutes, it means that all those around the world transactions that are coming in, miners are going to try and squeeze as many as they can into a block, solve as many per 10 minutes. Does that make sense? Any questions? Yes?
You said it takes 8 seconds to send one.
Yes.
But
Good question. Well picked up. Well picked up. Very good. Very good. So what happens? The transaction is preliminarily solved. Okay? Assuming that it's going to be successful. But what happens is the actual funds technically shouldn't be used for at least 6 blocks until 6 blocks are solved. So if I'm sending it to you and you know that it's going to happen, the network generally trusts that it's okay. But if you're Microsoft and I'm buying from you, I want to buy a website from you or software from you, Microsoft will have to wait, or they'll force you to wait 60 minutes or 6 blocks to make sure that that transaction is actually valid. That's a very good question. We'll hopefully answer it a little more soon. Any other questions?
Do different blocks have the same transaction?
Yes, but what happens is, so if I collect a whole bunch of, the likelihood of that is very unlikely, and once I create a block, it needs to be validated by the rest of the network. So if they say it's a double spend, they'll either reject, in fact they'll reject the other one, they'll say, yeah, mine's good. So it doesn't appear twice. That makes sense? Because once I create a block, I put it up to the network, the other nodes need to validate and say, oh, that's a valid transaction, it's not a double spend. Very good question again, and we'll cover something very similar to it shortly. There was another question. Yeah?
You were saying that it takes some certain amount of time to add a block. Does that mean that the blockchain is not suitable for real-time applications?
That's one of the big problems with Bitcoin. That's why Bitcoin is becoming a storage of value. Right? That's why people are throwing money at Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, I mean, it's getting faster, right? But you still, to do a transaction, you still need to wait for industry, all right? For industry, they still will need to wait those 5 or 6 blocks to authorize a payment. Between you and I, because we're talking small figures, generally we'll go, yeah, I'm sending you a Bitcoin, you go, yeah, sure, that's fine. But for industry, Bitcoin is not proving good enough. So Bitcoin is therefore becoming effectively the digital gold. That's what people are calling it, right? So we can throw money at it and just store it, because there's only 21 million Bitcoins will be ever mined, will ever drop out, right? So when a miner solves a block, 12.5 Bitcoins are created. They get it, but they can then try and throw them into circulation. Because there's a limited supply, people are now using it to store value. And some are saying it's going to go up to 400,000 per Bitcoin, which is mind-blowing if that happens. Good question. Was there another hand up? No? All right, so how's the block validated? So this should contribute to some of those answers as well. So each miner, when they take all these transactions and they put them into this Excel spreadsheet, they will check those transactions. They will validate and make sure that they're actually correct. But I hear you say, how do we know that miners are honest? How do we know that miners aren't putting in double transactions? Because each blockchain, each network is governed by certain rules. So rules, for example, that input equals output. So that means that if I want to send you 1 Bitcoin, you don't mysteriously end up with 3 Bitcoins on the other side. All right, so input equals output. But also that say that a transaction is valid. That if I want to send you 1 Bitcoin, that I in fact have 1 Bitcoin in my wallet. All right, so miners will check this. Now, the reason it's in their interest to do this correctly is because once they compile this list, once they solve the puzzle, which takes a lot of computational power, a lot of resources, a lot of energy, and costs money, once they do this, they propose that block to the rest of the network, and the rest of the network needs to then have a look at, firstly, that those transactions are valid, and secondly, that they solve the puzzle. Solve the puzzle, tick, check the transaction, oops, this one's not a valid transaction. Discard. So me as the miner that's proposed that block, I've done all of that work, I've committed all of those resources to creating a block, only to have it rejected by the network. And remember that the nodes are anonymous, so I don't know who all the other nodes are, right? So I can't collude and say, hey, guys, can you pass mine? Because I don't know who you are. And to do this, you need consensus. So the only way I could pass an illegitimate or invalid block onto the network is if 51% of the network said, yep, that's a valid transaction. Which means 51% of the nodes would need to be in collusion with me, cheating with me. Or, me as a node, I would need to own more than 51% of the network's computing power. And when you think what that means, that's significant. Does that make sense? Good. But, I'm hearing whispers in your mind. It was a very similar question. What if 2 miners created a block at the same time? So this is not 2 same transactions, but 2 same blocks. Because remember, miners are competing with each other. And it happens quite regularly that miners create 2 separate miners will create 2 perfectly valid blocks. Right? Because if you remember, the hash to solve the puzzle needs to be of a low enough value. Once they hit that low enough value, there's thousands of options that it can be. So it's not a single answer, it's lower than. So it happens all the time, right? 2 miners solve a block. So what we get is a situation like this, right? 2 blocks and 50% of the network says that's a good one, 50% of the network says yeah, that's a good one. Boom, both go up into the blockchain. The next miner, the next block that's being mined, they will see this. They will see that there are 2, that there's a fork. And they will attach theirs to one of them. As long as they're both valid, they won't have, it will be just, if there's one invalid, they'll just ignore that one. But if they're both valid, they just pick one. Right? That becomes this one. The next node is important. So this one, this block, is important. The next miner that's creating the next block we'll have a look and see there's one longer, one shorter fork. And the rule of the network is to always go with the longer chain, right? So what that means is this node will go here, the next node will go here, even if there's a split, longer one, and so on and so forth. Miners will always go with the longer chain. Yes?
You said that if two blocks were created and validated at the same time, they could go up on the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then a miner choose one of these two forks.
Yes.
So they could potentially, this scenario could, where two blocks are created and validated at the same time, could appear again and again. So we have two equally long forks.
No, so this is, yes, but that, the probability of that happening is that's why we have the 60-minute golden rule, because it is just the figures are phenomenal. To even get 3 in a row, let alone 4, let alone 5, that's why you have the buffer. That's why Microsoft requests a buffer of some extraordinary 1 in gazillion chance that 6 of them happen, there's a parallel of 6, which is just, it's just mind-boggling, the probabilities of that. So that's why they force you to have the 60 minutes, 5 or 6 blocks wait. Yes?
What would it mean if there were two that were the same? What would that mean for Microsoft when they check my transaction? They charge me twice?
No, they just hold, they just wait.
Okay.
They just wait. They go, okay, there's a transaction coming in. Yeah, good. Yeah, you'll get your software, but let us just wait. Make sure that sorry, 1 second. The reason they wait is because once this happens, once there's a longest chain, this block becomes an orphan block. All of those transactions become dissolved. They go back into the unresolved pile so that the miners of the next block will grab them. So for example, if you're Microsoft, I'm buying from you, and they go, sure, you'll get it in 60 minutes. Oh, that was a fork. My transaction gets dissolved. Microsoft goes, sorry champ, try again. Invalid transaction. And I go, no worries, I'll try again. In fact, I won't have to do any input. That transaction, if it's in here, if my transaction to Microsoft is in here, it will just get dissolved. It will go back into the unresolved space. It will get picked up in one of these blocks. And miners will do the righty by people in this block. They will see it and go, oh, that's an unresolved, let's solve this straight away. And that's, the community tries to look after the community. There was another question.
So if it's not discarded, do you get paid for the block?
Yes, you do. Yes, the money doesn't go. Sorry, for this one, if it's not discarded, or if it is discarded.
Well, is it discarded in that state?
If it's discarded here, once it gets discarded, you don't get the money.
But I mean, is it in the blockchain in that state, or is it being discarded as the next one?
It's already in the blockchain,
Yeah.
but it becomes effectively an orphan. So because this is the true and valid block, and this, I guess, kind of exists, but those transactions get pulled.
So miner doesn't get his money, his 12 bitcoins, unless the second block after him is choosing which one is the right one.
There are variants, but yes, in general, yes, but there are variants to that. The community looks after the miners as well because they've ultimately done the work, and it's not their fault, effectively. So by and large, yes, but there are algorithms to resolve some of that. Yes?
How often does that happen?
I mean, it happens frequently enough that it's discussed. So I wouldn't be able to tell you, once a day or 5 times a day, but it happens frequently enough, but it's not of concern because of the way the system is set up. But it's one of those questions that keeps popping up, and the network continuously tries to resolve it as quickly as possible, purely because of these transactions. The slight delay, or slight, 30-minute delay. Okay, so what was the other question? So can a hacker insert a block or modify an existing block? Well, I mean, again, in theory they can, but they create a fork, right? So they will create, if they try to insert or modify a block, there's a change, right? They insert a block, but if you remember that each block has the previous block's hash in its header, right? It's easy for the one you insert, but once you insert it here into this new block, I need to put it through a hash generator and I will get a different hash. So that hash will be different to the hash of the next one. Right? So let's assume this one is okay. I still need to solve it. I still need to put computational power to solve it, to make it low enough for the network to accept it. Okay, let's assume I've done that. I then need to change this one, because it's going to be different. When I change this one, which is computing power, I then need to go and change this one, which is computing power. Then you change this one, computing power. All right, so you see the picture. This becomes an insane amount of computational power to be able to do this. And again, this is again part of the 51% attack, where I would need to own more than 51% of the network to be able to do this. So just one second. Because the network will continue. This effectively, I'm creating a fork here. I need to keep solving this quicker than the network is continuing. The network is still building blocks on the longer chain. I've created a fork, and that fork is coming out. I need to solve. I need to overtake the current network, all the other miners that are creating blocks, for my fake one to become the longest chain that the miners will then jump on. Again, insane amounts of computational power required. Yes?
But in that case, they're already in the block, so does it mean that actually they are getting validated after getting in the block as well?
Yeah, but we're talking hacking. Yes, if they do that, exactly. If they hack and they hack and create a fake block or change a block, they're creating a fork. So yes, you can do that, but the network needs to accept it. The network still needs to accept it. You can go in and try to modify blocks, and this is what happens. This is, for example, when they change the rules in the Bitcoin fork. They decide they're going to have different rules. So at a certain block, they change the rules, creates a fork. Right? What they could effectively do is, they then make it a completely separate network. But if I create a fork because I've changed something, and I want this to become the main one, I need to overtake the legitimate one for it to become the longer chain. And again, as I said, the computational power involved is incredible. Any other questions? Confused? No? Make sense? Okay. Digital signatures. So they allow us effectively two things. That a message came from the right person, so the holder of a private key, or the holder of the authorized person of a particular account, and that a message has not been tampered with in transit. So when I was talking about the private key before, this is what a usual private key looks like. So it is, of course, it's not something you remember, but that's why they say, and needless to say really, that this key is vitally important. If you lose this, there's simply, theoretically, no way of recovering, say, your bitcoins. There are thousands of bitcoins that are sitting idle in wallets because people have lost their private key. There's one particular individual who's funding, he's gotten loans to go and excavate a dump site because of a hard drive that holds a private key to a lot of bitcoins that he purchased 5 years ago. So it is worth it that much that he's going, nah, I need to dig up a dump site. So if you ever get into this game, certainly don't lose your private key. And then there's a corresponding public key, which is effectively a hash of my private key. And because it's a hash, we know that it's a one-way valve. If I give you this, which is what I would give you, right? I'll put this out to the network. They can't get my private key. It's a one-way valve. So how does this work on the network? So when I'm sending a transaction or broadcasting one, me as the sender, I will have my message. I mean, of course, again, this happens automatically. It's not that I would physically do this. My message goes through a hash generator. I get a corresponding hash. That hash goes together with my private key into a signature algorithm. Don't ask me about the signature algorithm. It's mind-boggling. If you're interested, Google it. Your mind will be blown. All right, how these things work. And I get a digital signature, which is effectively like another hashing function. I get my digital signature. As I make a transaction, as I'm actually sending it, I send three things. I send my digital signature, so what I've just created. I send the message, the raw message, and my public key, which is a hash of my private key. Right? And anybody that sees that knows, oh, okay, that's the public key to a specific private key. The only way somebody can send a public key is if they have a private key. The recipient on the other side, or the miner, okay, they will check all of this and go, okay, the message, they will put it through a hash generator, they have a resulting hash. they will use my public key and my digital signature, which does voodoo magic, spits out another hash generator, hash. Then compare those two, and if those two match, then that's a valid transaction and one that hasn't been tampered with. Because remember, the moment I change anything inside the message, here, if I change something inside the message, there will be a huge difference in the hash that this miner will get. Alright? Which makes it obviously secure. So you think you can guess a private key? So as the point I made about private keys, it consists of 64 hexadecimal characters. Hexadecimal meaning that each character can assume 16 different variations, usually 0 to 9 alphabet foxtrot. Yes? And thank you. I think estimates are 173,000 years for a single computer to compute that. Sorry, yeah.
Did you mean that it was the same message, even though number 1 and number 2?
Yes, yes. Yeah, but this one goes to a hash generator. It's the hash that's important in this one. So that's why, yeah. Yes?
Many of those private keys are created with seed, so like usual words. Those are much easier to guess than the actual key itself, if you would want to do that. So like, let's say 8 different words, create a seed for the private key.
But that's if the private key is words.
Yeah.
So as in
Which
to,
a lot
you mean to force it to
Bitcoin wallets use that a lot.
words.
Yeah.
That's a Bitcoin private key. Like
Yeah, exactly. You use words, like 8 words for creating the private key. Use it as a seed.
Yeah, okay. Are you saying that this private key uses words?
Yeah, it's used as seed for generating the private key. The words are used as seed.
Okay. So what does that mean? Does that mean it's easier to hack?
Yeah, it means if it has been indeed used like that, which most of Bitcoin wallets do, you can just use the dictionary to guess 8 words and generate different keys like that.
But the Bitcoin network itself, as the actual blockchain, has never been hacked. What's been hacked is exchanges.
Yeah.
So the wallets.
Yeah.
But on an exchange, not on the...
No, not the exchange.
What do you mean? We'll talk about that. It's interesting. We'll talk about that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Very brief timeline on blockchain technologies. So the first one, as I mentioned before, is Bitcoin that hit the scene with Satoshi Nakamoto. In October 2008, he published the Bitcoin white paper. Satoshi being an unknown entity. Okay, so we don't know how many people are, if it's one or multiple, but released the Bitcoin white paper, basically arguing that we need a peer-to-peer payment without third-party interference. But it wasn't, well, it was in 2009 the first Bitcoin was minted in January, but it wasn't until May 2010 that it was actually first used to do a transaction. And it was to buy 2 pizzas. 10,000 Bitcoin to buy 2 pizzas. At $10,000 a Bitcoin, those are some seriously expensive pizzas. And then from there we see the slow evolution. There are over 1,000, I think 1,300 and more cryptocurrencies at the moment, all used for various things, but they're about top 10 that are actually moving forward and starting to get some traction, some value. Some of those are Litecoin, which was this one up here, October 2011. It's an offshoot of Bitcoin, it uses similar coding, but it was always designed to be the silver to Bitcoin's gold for microtransactions and so on. Litecoin's interesting because 2 weeks ago, or last week, was the first time that they used their Lightning network to cross from one network to the other. So from the Litecoin network to the Bitcoin network. And this, if it proves actually true and useful, that is effectively the holy grail of blockchain technology. Because currently that's one of the biggest problems, that all these networks function on their own. Same for Ripple. Ripple is effectively reversing the game on the banks. It's an intermediary for banks. So banks sending money from one side of the world to the other, they will use Ripple. On many are already using it. Amex, the most recent one that signed on to use Ripple to do their transactions, so American Express. Right? So there are already a bunch of banks using this to send their own money. Why? Because they want to save on fees as well. All right, without getting into too much more of these, Ethereum is an interesting one from July 2014, and many hailed Ethereum as the actual true future of the blockchain technology because it allows for applications to be developed and what's known as smart contracts. So currently in law, we have a contract that I signed with the bank that I will pay them back the money that they've given me for my home loan, and that's protected by law. But what Ethereum has done is protecting contracts by code. So you write a smart contract where, for example, with the bank, that I will be paying this amount, and once I've paid this off, automatically I own the house. So the code will do all that. It will take the money from me. Once all the conditions have been met, that I am now the owner of the house, I've paid it off, automatically it will create a contract that I'm the owner, put it in the blockchain. Now if you think, it doesn't sound like much, but if you think just the savings in all these transactions alone that makes, plus the man hours required to stamp, sign, print, the good old, oh Mr. Masley, can you please print, sign and scan, send it back, all right, with a signature. It sounds so outdated now when you think that this type of technology exists, where you can literally program it and just does everything on its own. This becomes very, very important when we start talking about autonomous driving vehicles, or not, we'll talk about that later, but not even autonomous anymore, but self-owning vehicles. That's something that's in the pipelines. As we move into September 2015, in fact on both sides, we have the R3 consortium, which started with about 40 financial institutions looking at the use of blockchain. Now it's over 70. And then we have the Chain.com, which is backed by Visa and NASDAQ. They're already using blockchain technology on... Got it. They're already using blockchain technology for the stock market. Okay? World Economic Forum estimates that by next year, 80 to 90% of world's financial institutions will be using blockchain in some shape or form in their daily transactions. Some of the applications, I've already talked about some of them, but e-commerce, so forget eBay, all right, imagine buying a book directly from the author. You do no longer go to a book selling store. I'll talk about some of these, but remittances are important. That's probably where Bitcoin has already earned a lot of credibility. Migrant workers. So let's, for example, Filipino migrant workers who send $20 billion a year back to the Philippines from countries all around the world. They are using Bitcoin en masse already. Right? So they will go, for example, in Hong Kong and Singapore, they already have Bitcoin teller machines, where they will take the Hong Kong dollar, put it inside the Bitcoin machine, they will speak to their phone, transfer the Bitcoins, they will text it effectively to their family in the Philippines. Right? 20 billion a year is how much is sent. Of course, currently only a portion of that is Bitcoin, but just imagine the fees. There's 30 billion in fees every year being sent to Sub-Saharan Africa. Right? Just in fees. Then we'll look at record keeping, loyalty programs, so your membership cards, for your flights, for Hemship, and so on and so forth. I'll talk about supply chain ownership and proof of identity shortly. But intellectual property, so things like patents. Right now you can make it global. I own this. This is my patent. Put it on a blockchain. As we already talked about, some of the securities that the banks are using, so they're already jumping on board of this to use for their trading. And smart contracts, as mentioned. So a whole number of ways to use, particularly the smart contracts. All right, some of the key limitations. First one, privacy. So as I said before, blockchain is private, at least the public networks they claim to be anonymous. So Bitcoin, yes, arguably it's anonymous because of those type of private keys, and you can't really guess who that belongs to, especially because you can create a new wallet all the time. But if I give you my address, right, you then can associate that address with me. Also, in exchanges, and this is where exchanges got hacked, right? Because when you buy Bitcoin through an exchange, you need to prove your identity to that exchange. That exchange gets hacked, they use all my data, and that's how Bitcoins have gone missing, right? On the private networks, or the banking networks, we no longer have consensus. So the banking networks, you're no longer private, you're no longer anonymous at all, and but your transactions are anonymous. But what that does is it just takes away the consensus. it's no longer a democratized use of the blockchain because the bank now owns it. Again, we're going back to those fire institutions giving the power to those organizations that own that network. The next one is scalability. This is a significant issue because firstly, the network is only as good and as fast as the computational power that we've got. So like an example we asked before, say a Black Friday madhouse sale, right? All these transactions go in, just simply don't have enough computers on that network to process all those transactions. Also, blocks are limited in size, right? On just about every network, there's a limit to how many transactions you can fit into a single block, which again, on a Black Friday, you can only, do so. A big one, and it's giving particularly Bitcoin a very bad name. It's said that the Bitcoin blockchain is using 0.13% of the world's power. All right, so that's significant. So it's as much as a country like Oman. All right, for a network that's not really in wide acceptance, they're still relatively small, relatively kind of in the background. Of course, that's because of the computing power that's required to solve the puzzles. But as the technology improves, right, and we speed up our processes, this is obviously going to be something that's addressed. Also, as we start moving to renewable energies, these problems might solve. Yeah.
You said that they solve these puzzles by trying to get a sufficiently low number,
Yeah.
which, like, efficiently is like trying to guess random numbers.
Mhm.
Is that a very ineffective way to use computation power?
That's why it is so energy intensive.
Can you implement it in some other way?
There are other solutions. I mean, Ethereum is now testing, so that's the proof of work. There are other, that's the most common. There are other means now being tested to make it simpler, but you're sacrificing security. So that's something that's being resolved. Okay, politics. Of course, as I mentioned before, different networks have different rules, and then once they don't agree on their rules, they split. All right, so Bitcoin has been split a number of times, Bitcoin Gold, just recently Bitcoin Diamond, and so on and so forth. What that does is that dilutes the power of each individual network. And again, it needs to be resolved, which contributes to interoperability. With all these different networks, if they can't talk to each other, that gives us a significant problem. Some of them are trying to resolve it, like the Lightning Network. There's also another one in the pipeline. It's called Overledger. It's effectively trying to create a bridge between different networks. Again, if they solve that, that is the holy grail of blockchain. All right. Very quickly, some cases. I'm conscious of the time. 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes? 3 minutes? 3, 4 minutes. Okay, so I'll give you this one because I love it. Right, the UN is already using blockchain. In May this year, they fed 10,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan using Ethereum blockchain. What they've done is, for most of them, they scanned their iris, right, using iris scanners. They associated that iris to a Ethereum wallet. They then put money into all those wallets and said, please, Mr. Maslik, off you go and buy yourself some food. I go into a shop, that shop has an eye scanner, doesn't have a teller, there's no money. They scan my eye and they say, oh, Mr. Maslik, please, you have $200 to go and spend and buy food for your family. As I get my stuff, I come to the register, they scan my eye again. Oh, you've got $7 left for your next transaction. See you later, have a nice day. Sounds futuristic, sounds scary, sounds crazy, but just think about the implications. The UN is formed of 193 nations that all send money using traditional means, paying fees. Then that money is sent to places where it's needed. Right now, you just take away just the fees alone. What I said before for sub-Saharan Africa, 30 billion is paid per year just in fees to send money there. Huge. UN is also playing with an organization called WIN, World Identity Network, where they're trying to put the 800 million children under 14 that are undocumented onto blockchain to prevent trafficking of children. Huge potential. Power Ledger, trading in energy, come and ask me after. Fantastic, Australian company, highly recommended. Sub-Saharan Africa, this is what we talked about. One of the key issues in Sub-Saharan Africa is that over 90% of the land is not, it's owned, but there's no proof of ownership. So there are a bunch of NGOs and startups that are now going to places and registering people's properties onto a blockchain, which they then can use as collateral to go and get a loan. mind-bending for those people living in those regions. Ambrosis effectively follows all transactions of basically going from field to table concept for your food and medicine on blockchain. So you can track exactly where your food came from. A lot of implications. Slock it. If you can lock it, effectively you can slock it. All right? It's a safe lock. It is a blockchain lock. Think of Airbnb. Put a lock that is blockchain controlled. I come in. No longer do I need to meet the host, get a key. I just verify with my digital ID. I go in. For anything that can be locked. Future, autonomous, I'll just mention this. Autonomous, the self-owning vehicles. So we're talking about self-driving vehicles, but people are already planning how to have self-owning vehicles, where you will pay, like Uber, the car will pick you up. Self-driving, you will pay it using blockchain. When it runs out of power, it will take itself, pay for its own charging. From there, it will take itself, pay for its own servicing, change tires, whatever it needs to. Self-owning, autonomous, distributed autonomous organizations, via DAOs, look them up. Elections, forget going to vote, vote on your smartphone. Safe, anonymous, safe, anonymous. All right? What it means for you guys, fast-growing industry. There's a race for the market, as I mentioned. Just about everyone is playing with this right now, or aiming to play with it. Room for innovation. It still hasn't reached the consumer adaptation cycle. Not everybody's playing with blockchain. Not everybody's using smart applications on their phone that use blockchain. Applications beyond transactions, beyond money. Think social good. That's that my time. That clock is wrong. I've got 13:01. Satellite. All right. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Can I have 2 more minutes? Right. I just want to tell you about this one thing. It's so cool. Right. Social good. South Africa. Slums. People don't have money, power, nothing, okay, they're in slums. There are NGOs that are going now, putting up Bitcoin power meters. And you from Sweden can log on and go, okay, that house, I'm going to give them 0.01 Bitcoin, and they will have power for the next 6 months. Incredible. Put that into charity work. Complete the whole concept of charity work. Right? SOS, Children's Village, Red Cross, so on and so forth. The amount of money that's wasted on administration, transfers, throwing money around. Okay? Huge. But most importantly, the most amazing applications have probably not been invented yet. And that's hopefully with some of you guys coming through. That's all I got for you guys today. I apologize if I've gone a little bit over, but that's it.